Hello, and welcome to another episode of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray Hammond, and today I'm here with Bobbi Elman of what's your page called? It's a long name. It's like Bobbi Elman
Yeah, it's
ND.
basically my name, and it says, I think, neurodivergent autism support and training or something to that effect. I need to
Yeah,
shorten it. Apologies.
yeah. I knew it was a long one. It's like mine, you know. Yeah, you like. First of all, I want to apologise for the intro video because I realise it seems a bit loaded to have put an image of a sunset in the background. I'm not saying you're in your sunset years. It was just a pretty picture,
Oh,
and I didn't
that
think
is
about it until we were
funny.
live.
That's funny. I mean, like, well, I am 54, and I will say that, and I say I'm old, so you're okay.
Okay. We'll start with some audio descriptions. So I'm David Gray Hammond. I'm a male presenting person in their mid 30s. I'm wearing thick rimmed purpley grey glasses. I have a lip piercing, a beard, and ear tunnel. I'm wearing a black t-shirt with my Emergent Divergence logo on it, sat next to my famously rickety bookcase in a very blue room with the obligatory Lord of the Rings Middle Earth map in the background. Bobbi, would you like to do your audio description?
Yeah, my name is Bobbi. I am a mid-50s, 54-year-old white presenting female with kind of cherry red raspberry hair. I have black rimmed glasses, no facial piercing, but I got a heck of a lot in my ears. Black top in my bedroom, which is kind of boring, but it's the quietest place in my house.
Fantastic. And actually, whilst we're here, I will mention that we did a podcast episode with you for Especially Interesting. And I think
Mhm,
we did a lot of talking about like that alternative scene, didn't
mhm,
we?
mhm.
Because you were talking about, I think it was the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And you were talking about, punk rock and everything. And it was a really good episode. So if you haven't checked out Especially Interesting yet, I highly recommend Bobby's episode on there.
It was fun. It
It
was
was
a
a,
lot of fun.
it
I
was a
mean,
good episode.
it really was, definitely. And I mean, I say that's where everything stems from, but hey, we
Yeah.
created it all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so today we're going to talk about seeking a diagnosis later on in life. We hear a lot about the process of children seeking diagnosis. We hear a fair bit these days about young adults seeking diagnosis. I mean, even my own personal story, I was 26 when I was diagnosed, which technically is a late diagnosis, but
Mhm.
actually, people go on to get diagnosed all throughout their life. I mean, the number of times I've worked with people who go, well, am I not a bit old to get diagnosed?
Yeah,
Is there any point in it?
yeah.
And I wondered if perhaps if we could start, Bobbi, with you talking a bit about your journey into diagnosis as an autistic person.
Okay, well, I don't mean to name drop some names, but through this I'm going to. So my journey started years ago when my youngest was diagnosed at probably age 4 or 5. And I realized that at that point I needed to learn everything I could about the autistic experience because nobody was telling me anything. There was
Yeah,
no information. That led me to a degree, a postgrad in autism eventually. And for probably about the last 17 years, that's literally where I worked. I worked as in school as a one-to-one for 8 years. Then I went on the local authority autism team, and then I kind of went off on my own. So that's what I'm doing now, kind of self-employed as a consultant. But long story short, a couple of years ago, probably around the lockdown, actually, um, I have friends, in the University of Birmingham. I became friendly with Damian Milton, and we're having a conversation, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm not autistic," and he's like, "Well, I thought you were," and I had started to hear that more and more as I was friendly and became friends with more and more autistic people. And I'm like, nah, I can't be. All of that internal ableism combined with the fact that I'm female presenting, um, I can't be. It's just not possible. Lockdown happened, and I'm talking or chatting with Kieran Rose, and we're talking about masking. And I had read something previous on the idea of unconscious masking, some chit chatting. And it was like a light bulb moment. like an absolute light bulb moment. And it was people in academy and people like even you, David, and Tanya, who kind of confirmed it for me that actually, yeah, we kind of thought you were too. You know what I mean? So I kind of started self-identifying for a good couple of years. And the reason I went for official diagnosis was to stop the imposter syndrome in my head. For me, it was just like, because for so many years since my child was diagnosed, missed opportunity. Oh, after that as well, I did some did some research with SBC, shall we say? I won't say the full name. Okay. And I was missed, and I was told that I verged on pathological empathy. Completely missed as autistic. They were looking into parents. So all these things and all these reasons peppered throughout honestly made me think I just couldn't be. So at 54, I'm filled with ableism I didn't even realize. And that fed this kind of imposter syndrome situation where it was like, well, no, actually, maybe you're not. Maybe it's just that you're just different in a different way, or they're the people that are saying that you are a bit confused. I mean, how rude. But it was all those reasons that led me to say, you know what, I think I actually need to know for myself, and I'm going to have a go and see what the actual official diagnosis process is like. See if I even get accepted, first of all, because there are barriers up. There are barriers. And, you sort of have to get past these barriers before you actually get to the official diagnostic part of it all. But that, in a nutshell, is what kind of led me to go ahead and go for it.
Yeah. That's quite the journey, and definitely some well-known names involved in that journey. It's almost surprising when you've been around some of those people that you even doubted it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, I say that it was, the internal ableism led me to be rude and question that whether what, people like you and Damien and Kieran and Tanya were saying, it's a twisted place to be in a way,
Yeah. And we'll definitely come back to the internalized ableism and that. I just wanted to highlight this comment quickly, who Maggie Wolfendale says, I'm 62 and on autistic and ADHD waiting lists, along with my son, 37, who had a childhood diagnosis of ADHD. And interestingly, my mum won't mind me saying this, my mum is 65 and she's just started on the waiting list for an autism diagnosis. And I think, if we revisit what you were talking about, that pathological empathy, or as we might call it, hyper empathy, where we are so overwhelmingly empathetic.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people who are seeking diagnosis later in life, it's possible there's a lot of misconceptions contributing to that imposter syndrome, because even when I was a child, the understanding of, so we're talking, say, 25, 30 years ago, the understanding of what autism was very stereotypical and pathological. And, there was this idea that we were sort of emotionless and lacked empathy and that we were trapped in our own little worlds. I remember being told as a child that autistic people were trapped in their own little worlds, and how wrong people were,
Absolutely. And when I was a child, so my go-to emotion being extremely hyper empathetic, and you know what, at some point I'd love to talk about this again with you, because it is kind of one of my massive interests, my passions, is hyper empathy and exposure anxiety, but that's a different story. But even when I was a child, my go-to emotion, regardless of how I was feeling, was crying, because it was instant. It was just immediate. I couldn't actually control it. So the effective part of your empathy just flies. And I find in the autistic community and amongst my friends, there are so many more people like me than I ever imagined. I honestly thought with the hyper empathy part that I was, lost. And it's another reason, again, David, like you said, it's another reason why I didn't think I was autistic.
Yeah.
Even though my own children are extremely hyper empathetic, demand avoidant, and one deals with exposure anxiety, and the similarities between us obviously are there. Yeah. Just blinders on. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
Other than ableism.
This is the problem, though, isn't it? These ableist attitudes around what autism is are boxing people out of their own identities. You
Yeah.
know, we are being gatekept from understanding ourselves because people have, excuse my language, shitty attitudes towards us. You
Yeah.
know, and I think for me, even I was diagnosed at the age of 26, and it was a year or so after that that I really started finding the online autistic community. Even then, in my 20s, I was like, where has this been all my life? You know, if I'd have found these people
Mhm.
earlier on, my life could have looked very different. And I wonder if perhaps that's something that perhaps you went through as well, that sort of feeling almost of anger that you didn't know there was a whole community there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand and can deeply, deeply empathize with people who get angry. Maybe it's because I'm older, maybe it's because of other things that have happened in my life, but I didn't get angry. I didn't get angry at anybody but the system. So like I was never angry at my parents. And my parents are both gone. And my mother passed recent 2 years ago. My father when I was about 15. I couldn't get angry with them because I knew what the narrative and the stigma was around that word at that time
Mm,
in the 80s, in the 70s. You know, it was a whole different world than it is today. And to be blunt, growing up, I didn't see autistic children. The only way I did is my best friend growing up was Down syndrome. I didn't know. It was explained to me years later because, as far as I was concerned, they just looked different and they were fun and they were older than me, but I didn't even realize that. Um, we were such good friends until they passed. Long story short, I went to their school one day. They went to a special school in the States. And now looking back is where I realized where the autistic people went, where the autistic kids went. Because in my classroom, the group of us in a mainstream classroom, we were considered the geeks, the smart ones, whatever. Yeah. And we were all kind of put in the front or the back. Right. And you kind of gravitated towards other people that were like that growing up. But there's no name for us. We didn't have a thing. And every other autistic child in the 70s was in a special school or institutionalized. So the education wasn't around. So I couldn't be angry with my parents for that. However, I am angry that the education wasn't there, the knowledge wasn't there, and that they were so limited. You know, back then it was only boys were considered autistic.
yeah.
Male-born children were considered autistic. That like there was, unless you were very, very extreme. And I hate these words. I don't like saying these words, but that's how it was kind of described growing up. So when we think about how far we still have to go, we have come a long, long way. So I couldn't be angry with anything but that, what I'm saying, that lack of education, that lack of experience, that lack of seeing, because I know I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's might be a statistic out there of older women now becoming diagnosed,
Mm.
but that wouldn't surprise me.
So we've had a question from Maggie Wolfendale. Maggie would like to know, did it take longer for you to recognize your children's difficulties because they looked normal to you?
Did it take me long to notice that my children were autistic? Is
I
that
think that's
basically?
what's meant. So because you're also autistic,
Mm,
did
yes.
your
Yes, I
children
would think
being
so.
like you?
Yeah, I would think so because at first my youngest was diagnosed ADHD. They were all over the place, very, very active, and that it was all ADHD at first. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know anything about anything. So, I trusted them. Sorry, my alarm just went off. Looking back now, and this is another subject that I'd love to go to in with you, but I think there's a crossover and there's going to be a connection between autistic people and ADHD. I think there's a real crossover. So mine was diagnosed at first, but then realized to be autistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think see, but the thing is, when I worked in schools initially as a one to one, and then when I went back in schools, advising schools and consulting with schools, I identified with the autistic children more, and I still didn't think I was autistic. See,
Yeah,
that's the disconnect.
I think one of the things I've always noted is that other autistic people like, if it wasn't for the fact that I know we're all autistic, I wouldn't stop and think about it.
No.
The only people where I go, that was a weird thing, is when people who can perform neurotypically are doing things. I'm like, this is really strange. Like, why why are they doing that?
Yeah.
um, so I feel like this is one of the things I've always talked about is I can't tell anyone what it's like to be autistic because I've got no point of reference other than being autistic.
Yeah.
All I can tell you is that neurotypical people seem pretty weird to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I think my grandmother knew something, to be honest with you, because I've said this before in a different life, but she used to take me to the boardwalk on the Jersey Shore in America, and we would people watch, and she would make up stories about, oh, this one coming down by, oh, do you think they're having an argument with them, or what do you think? Do you think they're married? Like it was literally people watching. And I think that was for my benefit because I think she kind of knew. So that's when coming back to the unconscious masking. When I realized I've been unconsciously masking my entire life, boom, explosion.
yeah,
That was the realization.
and neurodivergent by nature wanted to chime in and say that they're excited to be here and see us both, and that they themselves were identified 2 years ago at the young age of 62. So, yeah, welcome to the
Congratulations.
community if no one said it yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Moats Place the Page says, it's amazing how much ableism is heaped on us as children to
Mm.
cause us to deny the obvious when people around us are rudely pointing it out in a malicious way.
Mm.
I think we really have to look at this because there is a lot of ableism that we expose children to. And I think it does contribute to the number of autistic adults who fall under the late diagnosed category.
Absolutely.
Those attitudes towards autistic people,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
it it's incredibly, it's not even, I couldn't even call it insidious because that would imply that the ableism is sort of on the down low. It's not, it's
It's
overt
not. It's in your
ableism.
face.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, I'd like to come back to that idea of imposter syndrome you were talking about, because
Sorry.
I
Yes.
know that's something I experience. And I, especially on the masking front, I became so good at putting out an air of as non-autistic as I could manage, which to be fair isn't great. Um, but I got really adept at hiding the things that were natural to me. Hey, I've been diagnosed for like 7 years. I'm deep in the autistic community. People follow my work. They respect what I have to say. I still have moments when I sit there and go, but am I really autistic?
Yeah.
Could the people diagnosing me have been wrong? And so I can totally see why you would want that diagnosis to try and help with that imposter syndrome, because I think for those of us who are late diagnosed, it's a natural part of our lives is
Mm.
doubting ourselves.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I
I
mean, I think growing up, it's one of the reasons why I never got rid of the way I look, my hair, my clothes, because I could hide in that culture. People are
yeah,
gonna look at me as I'm weird anyway, right? Like if they're gonna look at me as if I'm weird anyway, because I can't help but be autistic. And I'm not very. I realize I'm actually not very good at masking anymore. Like I do, and I have to feel safe when I am. But so for example, with you right now, this is me. This is Bobbi with the, and the rings and you know what I mean? So I think I adapted this kind of culture plus the music rocks because I could be different in it. And they were gonna look at me as weird anyway.
yeah,
Do
and
you know what I mean?
yeah, I do know what you mean. And for me, like sort of that counterculture sort of thing was a good hiding place for me as well. Because when I
Yes.
look back, the people I used to hang out with a lot when I went out and did things, um, you know, um, we we were all what society would have seen as freaks and weirdos. Um, Looking back, we were probably all autistic,
Yes.
definitely neurodivergent in some way,
Yes.
and walking around in skinny, ripped jeans and various band t-shirts with massive spikes on our head and spikes all over us. You know that it was weird. It was like we were camouflaging our weirdness with other weirdness. And
Yeah.
I often wonder how many late diagnosed autistic people were part of that counterculture. Because I've got to be honest, most of the late diagnosed people I've met were alternative in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, we find strategies for ourselves. We find ways to sort of navigate the society that we live in that's normative and doesn't, generally accept us. So I think you'll find in like different countercultures and alternative lifestyles and different groups, there will be a lot of neurodivergent people, because I think it's kind of a mask in of itself, or a camouflage in of itself, to just say, you know what, this works for me. I kind of identify with it, and it kind of hides my weirdness and weirdness. Exactly what you said. Like, I really like that sentence. I'm
Yeah.
going to use that sentence often. But, and as far as the imposter syndrome, getting back to it, because I don't think I've actually answered your question. It is to me, it's a result of ableism. Absolutely. For me specifically, I can't talk for anybody else, but for me specifically, it is a direct correlation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And my post-grad degree didn't even help me with that. Like, none of it. It was the autistic community and getting diagnosed that actually helped me with that.
Yeah. Okay. And Jana Wilson says, do you think being ADHD contributes to imposter syndrome because some traits of each are opposite, so don't fit with one or the other, if that makes sense?
That makes sense to me. But I as I said before, I think we're going to find that they're closer connected than we actually believe them to be currently. I believe in the future there will not be a separate diagnosis. That's me personally.
I also I'm very much, I was quite excited when I saw sort of a presentation coming out of the University of Durham suggesting that autism and ADHD are actually two different diagnostic categories that are part of the same type of same neurocognitive style.
Yes.
I know for me, being ADHD, the imposter syndrome that comes from that for me is less to do with the traits not fitting with each other, and more because to me, being ADHD is a completely different, well, it's not completely different, but it is a fundamentally different experience to
Yes.
being just autistic or just ADHD. Like, when you put the two together, it's this whole other extra experience.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
the more neurodivergencies you add in there, the more unique that experience becomes.
were you in the chat when I said that I was shocked that they said about the ADHD part of me, that they think that I am and are going for that? Do you remember that? Right? Right. So how disconnected there? I accepted that I was autistic, and it took the assessment and the diagnosis for them to say, actually, we think you're ADHD too. I mean, just it's. And I think it comes back again to that unconscious masking and that disconnect to self. We disconnect so much trying to please others and everybody else around us, not paying attention to ourselves anymore, because it shouldn't have been a surprise, right?
No. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to note here that the research that's out there on the co-occurrence of autism and ADHD is actually suggesting that sort of half, if not more than half, of autistic people are also ADHD, and vice versa. So, there is a huge overlap there. But certainly for me, it does contribute to imposter syndrome. But like I said, it's not because they're
Right.
at loggerheads with each other. It's because I am my own unique neurocognitive style.
Yeah.
So I don't fully relate to either as a standalone diagnosis.
You know what? Light bulb moment again. I think that is also part of the reason why I was feeling it too. Because knowing that now, especially knowing that I'm, ADHD, it's sort of like you go, actually, yeah, no, maybe that was the disconnect too, because I wasn't relating totally with one experience or another. Oh, here we go. See, you blow my mind every time.
I'm happy to have helped.
Seriously. No,
Great.
that's really something to think about, because I actually think you're 100% right. And that's exactly what I deal with as well, or had dealt with. I don't feel, I have to say, I like the imposter syndrome for me just went. I don't know if it was the exhale and the relief of the diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
That made it go. But I really, knock on wood, haven't felt it since,
Yeah,
really.
I'm really glad because it's always good not to feel that
Yeah.
thing.
Well, and
But
it's a horrible thing to feel,
it is.
Imposter
It
syndrome is
is.
actually horrid.
I have to say, most of my imposter syndrome now focuses itself on I'm not academic enough, or I don't know what I'm talking
Yes,
about. That sort of
yes, yes.
thing.
Oh, yes. Okay, so my imposter syndrome's not gone, but no, I'm not academic enough. That's still ringing in my head. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know enough, so why am I opening my mouth? Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, I lied. It's not gone.
And this one was an interesting comment from Esther Bala. People don't believe I'm autistic when I tell them I'm 50. They think I've been diagnosed wrong or I'm being dramatic. I think a lot
Mm,
of people can probably relate to this comment.
mm.
Um, and
Yeah,
again,
I
I
had a
think
couple
it
of people
comes
say
down
the
to
same.
ableism.
Yeah.
Ableism. People have this preconceived notion of what an autistic person is. You know, even in neuronormativity, we don't just have a concept for what normal looks like. We're told what weird should look like as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the reason why we celebrate Weird Pride Day. Is because actually weirdness can look however we want it to look,
Mm,
um, and we don't have to be ashamed of it. But definitely, there's some issues. I think, obviously, the older you are, probably the more prevalent those issues are with ableism because, like I said, the further back you go, the more, just the worse the attitudes towards what autistic men, get. Um,
Yeah, no,
but
absolutely. And it's a bugbear of mine, it's a of mine because I don't understand people my age when they do get so stuck. It's like, wait a minute, this is what you think. You're being challenged on it. You're being told that that's not true, or that's not, we've changed in the way we're thinking. Move a little bit with it. You don't need to be so stuck.
yeah,
So if anybody older is out there is listening, say that to them. If they're, because I've had the same. I've had people going, oh, well, I don't really think you are. Or why did you even bother going for the diagnosis? And it's like, well, number one, it's none of your business. That's number one. And number two, educate yourself.
yeah, absolutely. And I wonder because there's something that happens for me still in my mid 30s, and which surprises me. And I wonder if it's still a problem, that I'm going to have to look forward to for the next 20, 30 years. Is I'll go, I'm autistic, and people go, I'm so sorry. What?
Yes. I'm so and like I'm saying I'm sorry to you that you actually hear that, because I actually really am, because yes.
Yeah,
I've said it in reference to we were someplace not that long ago, and I was saying it to somebody that my youngest is, and they were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I turned and I went, "Yeah, and I am too." And you should have seen their face drop.
yeah.
It's like, why are you what are you sorry about? Ah.
The thing that gets me is I'm like, they say I'm so sorry. I'm like, I've been autistic for like over 30 years. I'm pretty at peace with it
Mm,
now, largely
mm,
because I don't talk to people like you anymore.
mm.
Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be. I'm not going to say that it's all sunshine and rain. It doesn't have to be a
no,
tragedy either. It's an
no,
aggressively neutral
absolutely,
thing to be autistic, and
absolutely,
I guess that
absolutely.
that probably contributes to the whole, the imposter syndrome, doesn't it? Because we've been
Yes,
told that it's a tragedy. So if we're like,
yes,
well, my life's not tragic, yeah, it's been tough, for example, because you're autistic
yeah,
in a neurotypical world. But I think for the people who can't look and go, well, I'm not a tragedy, so I can't be autistic.
mm,
You know,
mm. Or they focus on the deficit model and focus on the deficits and go down the tragedy model of, oh my gosh, I am, and it's also bad, and I feel so sad for them. I feel so sad for them because they're getting the wrong information and the wrong education. Because
yeah,
right, it's not all happiness and roses. It's not all lightness. Even the social model says and it accepts that it's not all light and it's flawed. But
yeah,
it's better. And the tragedy narrative, I'm 54. I am old. 30 years I've had that tragedy narrative bammed and
yeah,
smacked into my head, smacked into me. It was and I hate saying the words of this place or this company, but it was all Autism Speaks was the forerunner. And you
Yeah.
know how they look at it now. Now imagine it 20, 30 years ago. You know, what that narrative was, you know, I don't even think they were around even maybe 30 years ago, but even whoever was the same narrative as they're
And
pushing out now.
I think people in the UK forget that we have our own versions of autism. We literally have Autism Speaks in the UK. They just use a
Yes.
different name.
Yep.
They're called Autistica now. They were literally called Autism Speaks UK once. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they rebranded, but there's not a great deal of difference.
No, and let's
Um,
think about why they rebranded. Why would you rebrand?
yeah,
And it is sad because you delve a little bit deeper into these things and these organizations that you think are probably going to be none of them are autistic led. You
no,
know, they're
no,
all it's all about money and using and pretense.
yeah,
You know, it's I just want one of our organization, our artistic led organizations to have the reach that the NAS does in this country. That's
yeah.
all I want. I'm not
I
asking for
absolutely
much.
agree. Yeah, it would
No,
be really good to see that because I think, especially for late diagnosed people, having good quality information out there would make life so much easier.
mm,
You know,
yeah,
people wonder why there's so many of us doing advocacy through social media. It's because it's the only place we have to get the information to people. We don't have
exactly,
millions of pounds behind us to run huge campaigns. We are
exactly,
drowned out by the major sources of information. Well, when we're not being drowned out, they're appropriating our knowledge. So,
exactly,
but
exactly.
we've been asked another question. I think this one's for you. Gary Mulcahy. Sorry, I can't pronounce that correctly. I don't think, and I apologize. Do you struggle with inertia slash change?
Inertia. What? Yeah, especially when I'm focused. You know, it's monotropism. You know, when I'm down in that, hours can go by, and then if you try to move me or change me, I'm no different than my child who reacts as if like you're almost killing me. You know what I mean? Not to be funny about it, but it literally it is an immediate reaction of why are you in my face? Leave me alone. I'm doing something. You know, so and I've worked on that a lot because especially when you have small kids, you can't do that when they're like this big. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So I really worked on that when they were much, much smaller and
yeah,
made sure that I never tried to react that way. But I want to react that way. I
yeah,
want to. That feeling comes up. So
yeah.
yeah, change and inertia, you know, autistic inertia, I laugh because every time I'm on the Zoom, I'm the last one to leave.
And I think we have to talk about actually, you know, for late diagnosed autistic people, a lot of us have kids. You know, for me, I've got a 9-month-old myself, and I'm just really learning what it's like to have a baby in the house where you're like, you know, you've got that monotropic flow state, you know, you're hyper focused and you keep having to rapidly pull out because your kid's about to, I don't know, try and climb the stairs.
Yeah.
You know, that's one for me. If I don't act in under half a second, my child will be halfway up a flight of stairs because I'm
Yeah.
waiting for a baby gate to be delivered.
Yeah.
You know, that constant, you know, for late diagnosed autistic people, if you, especially if you don't know you're autistic, so
Hmm.
you just think you're broken because every time your child needs something, your brain goes, "What the hell is going on?"
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
but you know, you're not broken. Like you're just autistic. Your brain doesn't like being switched from task to task rapidly. Um,
Absolutely.
you know,
And also being autistic, I realize now when after my kids were born was the reason I raised them. I thought I was doing differently to my parents, right? Because I
yeah,
was brought up 70s, 69, born 70s kid. And you know, it wasn't even thought about hitting you for doing something wrong. You know, like it was an automatic. And a lot of other really bad parenting, just awful parenting, you know my parents were told to I was adopted and they got me at 6 days old and they were told to let me scream. I would settle myself out. You know, that kind of thing. Which I know I planned ignoring and we won't go into, but um it's radically different now. So I thought I was just doing different to my parents, not realizing that I was raising them to meet their needs instinctively.
Mm.
Because when you're raising PDA kids, it's a whole different world, as
Yeah.
you know, and one of mine is it deals with exposure anxiety. So exposure anxiety, real quick, is the excruciating sense of audience to one's own existence in a type of PDA, which meant that I really needed to learn differently because I could not teach this child directly. It would
Yeah.
not work. It never would work. And it doesn't work with PDA kids either. You know what I mean? It's a whole different style of parenting. So I'm thinking, you know, I'm just doing different from my parents. When I look back now, I'm like, you knew instinctively, like you still didn't accept the fact. I didn't accept the fact that I was autistic, but I was parenting them in a neurodivergent way.
Yeah.
Didn't even realize.
Oh, we've been asked to just re-mention what Autism Speaks is called in the UK. It's Autistica, the research group Autistica. They used to be called Autism Speaks UK. So yeah, they don't make a big thing of advertising that, but that is
No.
absolutely who they used to be. And they haven't come very far since then when you start looking into them.
Really haven't.
But no, parenting is definitely, I think it's a really big topic for late diagnosed autistic people because we do just do it differently. I think because our brains work differently,
Yeah.
we can't do the traditional parenting, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
You know, we find what works for us and our families because
Yeah.
if we try and fit ourselves into that neuronormative idea of what parenting should be, it goes wrong very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, all I had was stress whenever whenever the powers that be and the professionals in the school be like, oh, you know, you need to limit the screens. You know, limit the screens. They're on, you know, maybe an hour. Like, you got to be kidding me! The disconnect that and the absolute turmoil that created in my children and in my home. So I quickly stopped listening. I just learned to I'd be like, yep, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, not gonna happen.
See, I always say you have to find balance with the screens because you leave a neurodivergent kid with a screen for too long, the inertia will get so bad that there will be a meltdown when the screen is gone.
To a degree.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna say that with mine, when I decided to not limit them anymore, I found that they actually decided to leave the screen and find something else to do every once in a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would certainly never say that kids should be withheld from screens if
Right.
it
That's my
regulates
point.
them.
Yeah.
If it's any source of regulation,
Yeah.
encourage it as long as it's not doing anyone any harm. Encourage
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But in my experience, I found that sometimes, even for myself, if I've been
Yeah.
using a screen for hours and then someone wants me to look up from that screen and start a new activity, my immediate response is that sort of like
Oh,
anxious.
oh, absolutely. And we had that as well. And there were meltdowns, do not get me wrong. There were.
Yeah,
But you have to understand mine are 22 and 24.
yeah,
So they're already older.
yeah,
And they were already older when the screens came out and stuff like that.
yeah,
You know, and at one point we only had one computer because it was the new thing type. It wasn't exactly everybody had a computer like they do now, and not everybody had a screen, and not everybody had a phone.
yeah.
Um,
I
you know,
still remember the first computer we had. We
right,
had to sort of schedule in time to have a go
right.
on it.
Exactly what happened in my home because it was the way it was because we only had one. You know, it
Yeah,
was only one. Now jump to the fact that mine are 22 and 24. My 24-year-old is IT VP of IT of a multinational bank and credits being able to use the screens whenever they want it, right?
yeah,
And my youngest is now off to university after getting a distinction in college, and doing 3D gaming and 3D design.
yeah,
So there are they for my two, it was a regulatory tool, but it was also very much a massive interest and a passion, and I
yeah.
was not going to squash that.
No,
Sorry,
no.
I digress.
No, no. But whilst we're on this tangent, I would note to people, if you're worried about neurodivergent kids having screen time, an interest in screens is quite useful considering that everything is heading in the direction of computers. In fact, pretty much everything is computers now. Like it's just going to get more intense. So, encourage an interest in computers because that's
Absolutely.
probably a viable career option. It might be the only viable career option.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for my two, that, I that's exactly why I encouraged it. Cause I thought to myself, knowing my two specifically, individually, um, they're not the type to be able to go and work in mass situations. It's got to be a very specific thing that they do. And computers was the way in. So
Yeah.
why not encourage it?
This comment is interesting from Neurodivergent by Nature. I learned early on with both of them to parent differently, much to the increase of comments of how I was doing it wrong and not teaching them life lessons.
Yes.
This is such a quintessential neurodivergent parent experience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know you're neurodivergent as a parent? Because everyone tells you you're doing it wrong. Everyone tells you you're going too easy on them and letting them get away with it. No, that's
Yeah.
not what I'm doing. But
Yeah.
thank you for your misunderstanding.
And the local authorities and the key workers and all the Senkos and people like that, to them, not all of them. I had really, really good. In fact, a couple of Senkos became friends. But I was difficult. I was a difficult parent.
And
So you're either doing it wrong or you're difficult.
whilst we're on the topic, because obviously you went through the experience of trying to get support for your neurodivergent kids before you were diagnosed, how did the attitudes of professionals towards your children's needs impact on your own views of yourself and your potentials?
I'm really good at compartmentalizing because so I didn't equate any sort of experiences they were having or any sort of similarities until they got a little bit older. I'm also adopted. My partner is adopted. So I think that also kind of changes the way you look at your kids and you parent your kids. So I instinctively just saw them as an individual. It wasn't until my youngest specifically became a teenager that I started realizing things. And I all along I advocated fiercely. I think half the reason I'm called difficult. And then it became personal when they were a teenager, but I still didn't think I was autistic. But it was almost like, there were certain things that I was fighting for them as if I was fighting for myself.
Yeah.
And it was easier to do it for them than it would have been for myself at the time.
Would you say being neurodivergent yourself made it more complicated getting support for your children?
No. Well, I think it actually was a benefit because I think that I find a lot of neurodivergent people have a very, very, very strong sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
And I think the fierce fighter advocate came out in me, and it didn't complicate me or make things more complicated. Because remember, nobody thought I was autistic either.
Yeah.
Everybody just assumed I'm neurotypical. And I think that's the difference in parenting. Now, I will have to say this. As an autistic parent, if I was diagnosed much sooner with the kids, I think I would have had a very different experience. And I think I would have been much more dismissed. And that breaks my heart to say that. But I actually think that's true. I think autistic parents, neurodivergent parents with younger children, dealing with the system, dealing with school, dealing with having to get the support from the government, I actually think they have a hell of a time.
Yeah.
Much worse. It's I think if everybody knew that I was autistic at the time when I was fighting for my children and already called me difficult, I would have been dismissed. It would have been, oh, well, it's, she's autistic. Because of their attitudes.
I think it was Luke Clements from Cerebra has done research to show that disabled parents are more likely to experience institutionalized parent care blame.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're more likely to experience parent care blame. We're more likely to experience accusations of fabricated or induced illness.
Yeah.
Basically, if you're autistic, what you say about your children doesn't get believed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, because I have Ehlers-Danlos and my kids have Ehlers-Danlos, I can understand from that point of view what it was. And yes, I was dismissed because of it. And yes, it ripped me to pieces because I'm saying to them, this child needs a computer or needs a laptop for these reasons. We struggle with dexterity. We struggle at this rate. I do not feel my fingers anymore. In fact, it's very hard for me to cook and stuff because I can burn myself and cut myself. I have no feeling in my hands pretty much. And I'm saying to them, I know exactly what it was like being at school and having to write. And back then in the 70s, man, you were not allowed to leave.
Yeah.
There was, I sat there for hours trying to do these letters, and it was all down to Ehlers-Danlos and the fact that I just couldn't get it right. So yeah, fighting for my children in that, and saying I have also the same condition, I was probably more dismissed than not. I had to come back with so much medical stuff as a result of that. You almost have to come in like both guns, barrels blazing, like all this extra stuff just to say this is what they need, and it's not hard. No, you haven't given a laptop to any other child before. Guess what? You're doing it now.
Yeah.
And you can see that same support of having a laptop applies to an autistic child too, because the amount that it takes to take what you have in your head, put it out here, and then actually write it down for small autistic children can be really, really hard. They're used to tapping. They're used to keyboards. Most of the little ones that I was working with were already on the keyboards. Let them have it.
Absolutely. And so I think there's an increasing number of older people who are seeking diagnosis now, because let's face it, the number of autistic children that are known to be autistic, it's going up as recognition gets better. And those autistic children all came from somewhere, autistic parents, and autistic parents also probably had their own autistic parents. So for all the children that are being identified, there's probably even more adults who could be identified. So if you were meeting a neurodivergent adult who is thinking about seeking a diagnosis for the first time, and it's later on in life, let's say 40 plus, what would be your best advice for them for surviving that process? Because let's face it, it's not always a pleasant process.
Patience, because it's going to take time. It also depends if you go NHS. NHS currently, so I waited 4 years, I think it was in the end. And you need to understand that they come from a deficit model. So it is really tough. So my summary. Okay, so you have 2 steps. The first step is you have to go to the GP. You have to get past your GP. Your GP has to refer you. That's the NHS pathway for adults currently that I know of. I don't know another one. That's the one that I went. Think there is another one. Not sure what it is. So I went through my GP. Thankfully, my GP agreed and then sent me on for a pre-assessment. That pre-assessment was by a charity. Now, the beauty of that pre-assessment is that I was pre-assessed by a woman who was ADHD herself. And the person that was with her was autistic.
Yeah.
So, automatically put at ease because she told me that she was autistic and ADHD. So automatically put me at ease. And that whole pre-assessment, not really sure. They're very good at what they do. So it did not feel as if I was answering specific questions. It felt like a conversation. That was nice. And that was online at the time. And that went through really well. But then I waited for another year after that. So the actual assessment itself is usually a doctor of some sort. I can't remember who mine was or what he did, but they're obviously authorized to do assessments and proper assessments. Now, I was sent to the Lorna Wing Center because apparently I'm complicated.
Aren't we all?
Really complicated. Okay. So Lorna Wing, let it be known as NAS. It's the National Autistic Society.
Yeah.
So I automatically knew that when I had my assessment, my official assessment, there was going to be a lot of medical model.
Yeah.
And again, that felt a little bit more official. Again, it was quite conversational, and I think that's how they do it with adults. Now, my situation also complicated, and it can be for older adults who are looking for an autistic diagnosis, because we may not have anybody to inform on us, and that information on us is what parents do about their children when their children are being diagnosed. Tell me about their behavior. Tell me about their history. Blah 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 blah. There was nobody to inform on me as a child. Nobody. Yeah. Nobody knew me before the age 13. I don't have any friends from before the age 13 when I went to a very small private high school and made very good friends. So it complicates things, I think, for them. If you are younger and you have a parent that can say, oh, and when they were 2, they were blah, blah, blah. And when they were 4, they were like, blah, blah, blah. And oh, in school is like this, it's a whole different situation. They kind of only had me in my own memories, as best as I could give them. And maybe that's why I was sent to Lorna Wing. I'm not sure. So be aware of that. Be aware of the fact that you go back through your entire history as it is. And it kind of feels a little bit invasive sometimes, but it has to be, I guess, for them to have their little ADOS check marks and all these different things. I did my best to be my most authentic self. But again, that's really hard when you're faced with somebody who's official and, professional, and you're already kind of nervous. So I would say my biggest advice would be patient. Be kind to yourself through the whole process. Just be as kind as possible. Because it's tough. So for example, in mine, he turns to me at one point and says basically something to the fact of, well, we would diagnose you Asperger's. You should have seen my face.
Yeah.
You can imagine my face. And I immediately, instant, I'm like, no. He was a Nazi.
Yeah.
My mom, my adopted mom, was in a German work camp, and I'd already, he knew this and still had the audacity to raise that. So I just basically said, and I was lucky because I said to them, I said to him, that is nowhere on my summary. You will not include that anywhere on my diagnosis nor my summary.
Yeah.
Nothing. I don't want to hear the name. I don't want to read the name. I don't want to see the name. So I was lucky in that. I don't know if other people would be as lucky, but the fact that they were even considering at the NAS Lorna Wing Center to give me an Asperger diagnosis tells you something.
Well, I was assessed by a neurodevelopmental psychology team under the NHS, and my diagnostic summary actually said autism spectrum condition, which was better than disorder, but then in brackets said also formerly known as Asperger's syndrome. I didn't know at the time the history of the word Asperger's.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I found the online autistic community that I realized just what a loaded statement. And I'm really glad that's not actually my official diagnosis. They just tacked that on to the end for whatever reason. I think because it was around about the time when they were going through the change with the DSMs and stuff and all was being removed. But it sucks to see that on there because it just feels like someone painting you, even if you don't take into account the horrible history of the name.
Yeah.
It feels like being given a functioning label.
Yes.
It's not pleasant at all.
No.
And I think it's something that, especially if you're an older autistic person who is already in the autistic community, to then be faced with attitudes like that, where they will still use outdated terms, it's a really unpleasant thing to have to sit through.
Yeah, and the end, the summary, they give it to you and they ask you to authorize it, and then kind of tell you that they're not going to change anything, even regardless of what you say.
Yeah.
And the last kind of page and a half seemed to have been like this copy and paste tack on. So all during the conversation, I was realistic. I said, Donna Williams, I was friends with Donna for years, for like 10 or 12 years, because she was instrumental, also known as Polly Samuels. That's how I know her. She was instrumental in helping me understand my child and exposure anxiety. That's how I learned from it, right? So on the thing, it's like, we recommend Bobbi Reed, and then listed a book that I have that's already signed. And Temple Grandin was on there. I'm just like, you just got to be kidding me right now. So you have to take that assessment with a grain of salt almost, you know what I mean? And I talked to about 3 people, and also, what I'm like. So, I emailed them back and I was like, and by the way, blah, 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 blah. I reined it in a little bit, but I will say I gave Academy links, I think, to a live that you were in itself, David.
Okay.
On the different subjects of that Academy is covered in reference to the autistic experience. Explain why Temple Grandin is not a friend to the community in any way, shape, or form. You can hear it in me, right?
Yeah.
So that's another piece of advice I'm going to give people that go through this process. When you get that summary, I'm going to say, if you have somebody that really cares about you and you care about them, have them read it first or read it with you. I read it by myself and it was really horrific to read, because like I said, the medical model language is all over it. It's going to talk about your deficits. Oh yeah, apparently I struggle with empathy.
You're like the most empathetic person I know, but okay.
Like, are you serious right now? I struggle with empathy. To teach Bobbi about empathy, blah 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 blah. I'm like, you really? Oh, and then to help myself understand emotions better. I'm supposed to write out every emotion I feel. I'm hyper empathetic. Are you kidding me right now? Like, I don't know. I mean, I deal with alexithymia. I do because I don't always have the word for the emotion, but it's not like I don't know what that emotion is and I don't feel it because I know what it is. You know what I mean? I might not have the description for it, and because sometimes it feels like two emotions are merged. Does that mean? And it creates a whole different thing. But please don't talk to me about learning my emotions and or being empathetic. Like, it's
the weird
it's almost as
weird one for me was my diagnostic summary. They got like weirdly obsessed with the fact that I have like what they called a genius level IQ, and I was like, yeah, but what does this have to do with anything? Like, okay, I've got a really high IQ, so I'm really good at solving puzzles. Now, can you tell me why I nearly blew up a washing machine or accidentally set fire to a bin? Like,
It's funny. It's because they mentioned my intelligence on mine as well, and I'm just like, what does that have to do with autism? Like, that has nothing to do with my autistic experience. It's just a different
yeah,
thing
they've
to
got a
my
real weird
autistic
thing about
experience.
IQ. Like, I know that because I know they use IQ because they're looking for intellectual disability.
Yes.
I know
Yes.
they bring that in, but the
Yes.
whole IQ system, and I've known this since before I was in the autistic community, it's incredibly biased. Like,
Absolutely.
it favors a very specific group of people that I can't mention by name because the powers that be on social media will probably give me some kind of sanction because it's apparently bad to use that word. But
I
um,
gotcha. Yeah.
there's a very specific group of people who typically have a lot of privilege, and they are the people who IQ tests benefit. Except they don't even really benefit them. All they do is say you're good at solving certain puzzles, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And I mean, history shows too, not going too deep, and I won't say anything either, but history shows exactly why they were created and who they benefit.
yeah. So the fact that if you're an older person going for an autism assessment, don't be surprised if they have this weird thing about IQ tests because they do, and I'm still not entirely sure where it fits in. Like, okay, you've ruled out intellectual disability. What is the
Right.
relevance of the rest of it? Like,
Right.
like
Right. Right.
but
Right.
anyway, wrapping up, someone's asked me a question that I've been dying for someone to ask me for ages. So Moats placed the page says, maybe I've mentioned it before, but who's the bear on my shelf? Okay, so there's a whole story here. This is Tedworth. Okay. Tedworth has been with me since I was born. He was given to my mum on the day I was born, and one day I was very ill, and my mum gave me Tedworth to cuddle, and I've never given him back. I even knitted him his own little outfit when I was about 6 years old, which is this rainbow yellow thing. So this is Tedworth. He is a teddy being, not a teddy bear. So,
Oh, oh, the level of love I have for that. That's wonderful.
and he sits on my shelf so that he's there for all my live streams. So,
I have to ask you one question. Is your little one walking?
okay, crawling lightning speed and pulling himself up and sort of walking, holding on to things. Not
Do you know what? Do you know why I'm asking, right?
I need to secure the bookcase. Yes, it's on the top of my to-do list. I just need to. Annoyingly, all the walls in my house are brick, So I have to use
Oh,
a
no.
hammer drill to drill things into the
Oh,
wall.
yeah, that's a whole different level if it's all brick.
Yeah.
I get you on
Um,
that. But it's funny because I'm just had visions of my little one who would when they were literally starting to walk, they never crawled. They kind of shuffled and pulled themselves up and then started to walk. Mine would have been climbing that.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
mine would have been just climbing that
Absolutely. This
automatically.
this bookcase is designed to be climbed as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Like, it looks like some kind of funky ladder. So,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So anyone watching who's worried about the bookcase and the fact that I have an infant child, don't worry, it's going to be secured before he's walking. Um, but yeah, it's been really good having you on this evening,
Thank you.
Bobby. We're definitely. I've seen so many potential more topics we can talk about: Ella's down loss, hyper
Yes.
empathy, exposure anxiety. I'm
Mhm.
sure you'll be back.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's been really good. Really enjoyed this, and thank you to everyone who has come along and joined in the comments. It's really cool that people still come and listen to me ramble for ages. Um,
I could listen to you all night. I'm serious. You're wonderful to listen to.
thank you, Bobby. You're good to listen to too. I'm Yeah, anyway, this has been David's Divergent Discussions. We've been here tonight with Bobbi Elman talking about seeking a diagnosis later in life. It's been a fantastic episode. And to the people tuning in after the fact on podcast platforms and YouTube, thank you so much for listening. Please do share this around with people. Every little helps. And I really, really look forward to the next episode, which I think is we've got an episode next week. I believe we are talking to Amity from
Nice.
who they are neurodivergent singer songwriter, and they're going to be coming on to talk about being a musician and being neurodivergent. So that's going to be a really good episode as well. I think that'll be
Yeah.
next Tuesday. I think I should really keep
Fabulous.
better track of my own calendar. Um, so yeah, thank you everyone. And now's the bit where we wave awkwardly whilst we wait for this to end. Bye.